I now have great pleasure in asking Chief Inspector Dan Eagle, who is the Jewish faith lead for the Sussex Police, to come up and say a couple of words and light a candle.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Chief Inspector Daniel Eagle. I'm one of Sussex Police's 4 silver commanders in the control room in Lewis. I also have the honour of being the Jewish faith lead, which I took on about the start of January this year. I've been asked to give a few words, so I'm both honoured and humbled to say a few words to you today, and I'm going to invite you to join me while we light the candle here in a moment. So we're going to light this candle in the memory of the 6 million Jewish men, women and children, along with the other millions of people and victims that were systematically targeted and murdered by the Nazis in the Holocaust. Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel stated, to forget a Holocaust is to kill twice. I think its words are quite powerful, really, and very prudent in where we live now. So in this 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, we remember them, those victims of subsequent genocides also. And in humanity's darkest hours, we learn from the past for a better future. I'd just like to join me in a minute's silence. Thank you.
Again, we can't see you, it's really dark, but thank you for staying after the break and staying for the film. I'm Professor Victoria Grace Richardson-Walden, or Vicky, which is much shorter, here at Sussex, and I'm really glad to be joined by Judy Ironside, MBE. Would you like to say a few words to introduce yourself, Judy?
So I'm the founder and president of UK Jewish Film, which actually I started in Brighton in '97. We moved to London, National. We went then on to Geneva. And I'm also the founder of the Pears Short Film Fund, which is one of the joys of my life because we've encouraged so many new filmmakers, young and old, to write scripts and then create films with the fund on Jewish themes. But we're here today to talk about Tal Kantor's short film, Letter to a Pig. I just wanted to throw out a small challenge for anyone who would like to pick it up, to maybe think of yourselves for a moment as a film jury and to rate the film on 2 things, just very briefly. One, the impact that it had on you, and 2, maybe in terms of memorialization of the Holocaust, how powerful you found it. And we're going to ask you again when we open this up to the audience, whether that's changed at all after listening to the conversation between Vicky and I, who are privy to information that Tal Kantor has shared about the making of this film.
Thank you. Yeah, and we will talk for about half an hour-ish together, and then we're opening it out, not just for questions, but for your responses to Judy's provocation there, but also other comments or feelings or thoughts about the film as well. So please do feel this is an open discussion. We thought we'd start then by talking about the director's intentions in a little bit, and obviously Tal isn't here to speak for herself, but we'd recommend that you watch the very short making of film that she created on YouTube, so it's publicly available for those of you that might want to watch it. I was struck in that she talks about this film as pieces of memory, fragments in the younger generation's subconsciousness, and how it kind of brings that human and the animation, and we'll talk about this later, the different symbols of the pig and the animal human, but everything sort of feels a bit incomplete, a bit fragmenty, and that clearly was a really profound idea that influenced her animation style. So I wondered also for you kind of what things from the making of and other things you know about Tal and the film particularly struck you about it.
So I think it's important to say at this point, to reveal that this film was made from a dream that Tal had. Every year in Israel, on Holocaust Memorial Day, as today we've been privileged to hear from Peter, a Holocaust survivor would come to each school. And 17 years ago, Tal had been really impressed. I think it had made a huge impression on her that Chaim had come to her school. She created this character of Alma as one of the children in the school that day. And Tal went on to have a dream all those years ago that very much stayed with her. Many of you may have one, maybe more, really significant dreams that have never really gone away. They've stayed with you. And for Tal, as a filmmaker, she decided that she had to make this film to tell about her response to Chaim's story. And I think that's one of the reasons for me, as I understand it, let's hear from you as well, Vicky, of why it felt fragmented at times, hazy, because it was a very important memory, but had been changed in her dream.
Yeah, I think you raised two really important things there about coming back to the kind of memory and the fragmentation, but also the hearing a survivor talk. And everyone here today has heard a testimony. And we can all go home and we can think about that or forget about it, and sometimes people do over time, or we can do something with it. And this is an example not just of it staying in your mind, in your cognitive thoughts, but what to do with it with your body and materiality. And as an animator and as an artist, she's taken this on into her own body, and it's something that in my research I've been really interested in how the animators do this, that when you animate testimony, whilst you may have the voice of a survivor or hear fragments of it, the animator's response to that becomes materialized and wrapped up into this this memory as well. So it's not just a memory of the Holocaust, it's a memory of hearing a memory of the Holocaust as well, and these things come into contact for animation. So for me, that's always that very powerful thing. And I thought it was really interesting, and Judy introduced me to the making of, and I'm really grateful for that, to see that they used a technique called rotoscoping, where you actually film the people. So everything you see there was people filmed mostly in green screen studio spaces, and then the drawing and the painting was done on top of that. But what's different to this from traditional rotoscoping is bits of the filmed image come through at times as well and seep through. So normally you would draw over it and just use the people as a base. So that's quite a unique technique, and I think some of her crew, which was a very long list when you watch the credits, said this was an incredibly laborious and kind of long process to do as well.
So she met a French animator at a festival when she was at the very start of creating this film, which actually took 5 years. I think that speaks a lot about animation, which is a very slow and very expensive, because it's so slow, very slow process. And I think, well, for me, this was very unique, the way they'd use the video. So even when you see an animated outline of the teacher, for example, That's filmed against, maybe some of you know about rotoscope, but it's filmed actually showing the original. There would be an actor, and then you see the animation over that. But then, for example, you see Haim's hands, which I thought were really beautiful, and the sort of tension of him dipping his biscuit into his hot tea and waiting almost with that tension as it drops into the glass. Somehow that was very moving for me. So over 5 years, this film was created, the animation of it. It does have a very dreamlike quality, doesn't it? So it was the perfect vehicle, if you like, for her to tell her story.
And that moment with the tea is when Haim is talking about the kind of the youth in the present, and how he understands his story is distant from them, and what it was like to actually live this. And so, like the photorealism of seeing his actual hand in the tea brings that embodied experience of the past kind of into the present as well, and this kind of transition or transmission between generations. I was also struck in the same way. I hadn't noticed it until we watched it again today, at the moment that you see Alma's hands is when she holds the piglet. And that's kind of her moment of a kind of contact with a past and a reality. And maybe we can move on to the pig. And one of the things that comes up in that making is that this is a film about othering and the assumptions that we make of people. And it touched me more, that theme, having listened to our testimony earlier, and this request of all of us to do good things as human beings and to be human, about how easy it is to other, and that othering in this film is very much about through the symbol and the picture of the pig. And I don't know if you wanted to start talking about that.
I mean, the choice of animal, I don't think was by chance. In both Jewish and Muslim religions, the pig is not a clean animal, it's feared, and many children grow up fearing the pig and knowing they can't eat the flesh, which is forbidden because it's a dirty, filthy animal. And yet here you have this shift at the beginning where Tal has chosen the animal to save the child, and then we see it actually as the aggressor, and then we move again back in this sort of dream sequence as the pig being cherished. And it's actually at that point, there's quite a long time where we don't have actual video image of hands or anything. And then, as you say, Vicky, again we see Alma's hands really cherishing this baby pig, which she releases from the torture that the pig has gone through at the hands of the children. So there's a lot of shifts one's asked to make in the film. I've seen it several times now. I think initially, and I'll be interested when we open this to the audience, initially I found that quite difficult to make those shifts between the good and the bad, the persecutor and the protector, and the victim, yeah.
When we talked about it before, when the pig is the beast, the perpetrator, reminded me of Animal Farm and the kind of really angry pigs in that, kind of going back to my childhood and how I think of pigs in popular culture. But it opened up all those questions to me about what it means to be human, and why we refer to bad human behaviour as animalistic, and why people call people animals, and that confusing moment when he says that he's saved by a pig, and then he refers to the animals, and he's referring to the human beings, the Nazis that tried to find him. And this slipperiness between human and an animal that's referred to as impure, imperfect beast as well. And there's also these very subtle things where even Alma's nose looks a little bit pig-like. It's that sort of slightly squared, slightly non-human. And does she feel like an outcast? She hides under the table. So this is kind of drops of moments where the pig sort of seems to appear and you're not sure why. And again, it's this fragmentary thing. It's even when you do see a full pig in the classroom, it doesn't belong there, and it shimmers around and it's not 100% clear. And it is very important at the end of the film. It says no animals were harmed in this film. So whilst everything else is rotoscope, no pig is pulled up into the ceiling.
Yeah, I think for me that was the most touching thing here. This, are we the animal? And even when we say that, there's another othering, that we are the animals from us as well. Yeah, the pig is difficult. It's got less difficult, I'm with you, the more you watch the film. Yeah.
And yet we know the pig to be a very intelligent animal. When Vicky and I talked before, I was saying, actually, physiologically and anatomically, the pig is the most similar to the human. Their organs are in a similar place within their skeleton, and diseases often progress in the pig in the same way. So, although many of us would like to refute that, there are connections, and that may be one of the reasons. I think it was quite an extreme decision for her to use the pig as a symbol in the film. On the other hand, presumably the truth was that it was started by Chaim, who that day made his talk to the students around a letter he'd written to the pig that saved him. So I guess that was actually taken directly from Chaim. Yeah.
The idea that he writes a letter to the pig as well as is communicating across species or to the other, even if your language might be different, that you still feel the desire to speak to the other. Again, I hadn't noticed it before, but the eye contact between him as a child and the pig in that opening sequence, and then the Nazis, the other animal of the film, it's the feet that you see, and that kind of fear and tension of the shadowy figure in the background who he has the revenge for. But it's the eye contact and the empathy that he feels with this other animal, the animal that we call an animal, the pig. We were talking a bit earlier today about kind of animation in general and the Holocaust, and it gives you this freedom to go into dream spaces, to bring pigs into classrooms. And it's not the first animation about the Holocaust. People might be most familiar with Ari Folman's Anne Frank that came out 2 or 3 years ago now.
Where is Anne Frank?
Where is Anne? There we go. There was an anime, Japanese anime about Anne Frank a long time ago as well, but there's been lots and lots of short films about the Holocaust, particularly people trying to work through Holocaust memory. So either Holocaust testimony, Silence was quite a famous one that was screened by Channel 4 in the 90s in Britain. They were one of the first Holocaust films in the late 1940s, came out of Australia, and that was a Holocaust animation by a survivor trying to work through all this memorial symbolism that was appearing and the kind of symbolism of his reality, so the star, the striped uniform, and then with candles and stones and people and the sounds of boots. And then films about second and third generations. I was a child of Holocaust survivors. And there's another one that was very similar, and I actually realised the filmmaker of that, she was named right at the end of the credits as helping. I forgot the name of the film. But these films where people talk about not only their parents' or grandparents' experiences, but the effect it had on their childhood, and kind of feeling in a different world, and kind of how can you present that to people? And I've always thought animation deals with those challenges of the unrepresentable and the impossible and unimaginable. And these are contested terms now for good reasons, because we should imagine and think about this past. But it allows you to grapple with that. You don't have to show photorealist violence. Here you have the pig strung up, which is a really powerful symbol and really moving. You don't have to show human violence or kind of mass murder or dead bodies. But you can grapple both with how can I remember, how do I feel about this past, and then the memory of it as well, and find ways to play with symbols. And of course animals, as we talked previously about mouse. Mouse was a really famous example of using animals as a way to think about the Holocaust and one's memory with it. I wonder if you'd like to talk a little bit about kind of how particularly using animation here makes you feel.
Well, I found myself wondering, could this film have been made any other way? You know, could we see Tal's dream with Alma in the lead, you know, talking about a dream and really being evocative enough? And I couldn't see this story, Letter to a Pig, being made in any other way. And I also think it's really important, obviously we're all here today thinking about memorialization of the Holocaust. How do we do it? We're still very privileged to have Peter with us, to have some other Holocaust survivors with us. There will be the next generation who will be able to talk. But we're also always thinking, what ways are there in which we can evoke memories, keep memories alive of the Holocaust? And obviously, well, I'm biased, but I think film is incredibly important in that process. I think you probably do too. And I hope that images from this film and other films that you see will really provide that memorialization for you. We have statues, we have photographs, we have talks, television programs, but all these images that are so important to remain with us. And I know we say, lest we forget, but sadly, we have lots of reason still to remember the Holocaust, the stories of the Holocaust, the images that we saw today. Yeah.
It's quite interesting, I think, with animation that for decades we saw lots of debates about live action television and film. NBC's Holocaust back in the 70s, Schindler's List caused a big furore in the 90s. Life is Beautiful, a couple of 2 or 3 years later. And it continued. Every time there was a live action film about the Holocaust, there were big debates. And often it's too simple. Of course, it's an hour and a half, 3-hour film. Not every film can be Shoah, which is 9.5 hours long. You know, it's stereotyping, it's simplifying, and kind of film is stuck in having to do that. But I've never seen the same kind of criticism towards animations. Now, partly that might be because they're not as well circulated. Maybe a few have come to your festival, but you're probably not. I mean, apart from the Anne Frank films, very few have made it to cinema as animations. But they just seem to strike people more. They seem to create this affect. And I think by being animation, people don't expect it to show any kind of reality of the Holocaust as well. So maybe this is a medium that affects people more deeply, or people are less kind of wary of or critical of live action. Have you had many animations come to the Jewish?
Yes, we have. And actually, more recently, they've got more and more sophisticated, because we had responses from audiences initially, well, as adults, you know, this is either a film for children, or this is, okay, it's a family film. But more and more, say, Charlotte, a couple of years ago, the story of Charlotte Salomon was very much an adult film. And I think our audiences are gently getting educated to the fact that this is another medium. And I also wanted to say, I think we've got to be very aware, well, I hope we can be very aware of shifting so that new generations find ways to access these memories and feel moved and take them on, really, as well.
It's interesting you mentioned Charlotte Salomon, actually, because her style is one of the styles that's copied by one of the animators of the animation Silence in the 90s. And it mixes this black and white etching with her kind of patchy watercolour paintings to shift between kind of different types of memory. So the traumatic period of the Holocaust, and then the period post-war in the film set in Sweden, when it's supposed to be much nicer, but you still don't feel like you belong. And you're still sort of distanced from the reality between you, but it's a slightly different kind of trauma. And her work has had a huge influence in animation and lots of other contexts as well.
Shall we open it up to the audience? Just to return to my initial challenge. Now you have more information about the film. It'd be interesting to know if you voted again, where your thoughts are on that. If more knowledge has meant that it's increased the impact or not changed it or changed how you feel about the film. It'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on that too. I think we can just about see hands up, but roving mics are going to come around. If you wanted to address your question particularly to Vicky or to me, please do start by saying that.
Thank you very much. It's not so much a question as a comment. I haven't changed my view. I thought it's incredibly powerful, and the most powerful message for me was that victims can be perpetrators and perpetrators can be victims, And what you said, Judy, about, yes, the pig is the most similar animal to us. And the fact that we are able to other others, who are actually essentially us, is the whole problem of the Shoah and every other attempt to commit genocide against a people, that we're doing that to ourselves because we're essentially human. And when we say we're essentially human, we're also essentially creaturely, we're earthlings, and that we share with the pig such a close bond. We also share a bond with other animals as well. But this shift between, that the film also brought out, between the victim and perpetrator and how they can change places was very powerful. Thank you.
I think that feeling of that kind of very subtle sort of pig-like nose, and also her ears at one point look like they're sort of maybe going that way, but never quite emerges. I was thinking about that in terms of that kind of potential pig here being the perpetrator idea in all of us. And Ernst van Alpen, who's a historian, somewhat controversial in some of the stuff he says, argued once that he felt Holocaust education had failed because it at this time back in the 90s was focused purely on victims and victims' experiences, and there was a big pushback about listening to perpetrators and identifying with perpetrators. And he said empathizing particularly for non-Jewish people engaging with this past, he said they leave saying, oh, that could have been me, but actually in their case it probably wouldn't have been them. What they don't leave is thinking how easily it could have been, I could have been perpetrated, or I could have contributed in some way, been somehow complicit, turned a blind eye to this, and how all those little actions add up to allowing the Holocaust to happen at such a widespread level. So I thought that the tiny kind of references there, but also that the heads hanging in shame after their kind of collective punishment of the pig is also a really powerful still moment as well. I don't know if you wanted to respond to it.
I think because of the animation, they were able to bring in almost illusions to that subtlety. You saw it and then you didn't. That's both dreamlike but also rather human. We acknowledge something and then we let it go. We might feel guilty that we're a bystander, but then we move on with our busy lives. And I think the animation particularly hinted at this very cleverly. Yeah. Their mic's coming.
Thank you. I found it a very powerful film. I was very focused on it, but the one thing I really felt very strongly about was at the end, that girl stood out of all those people and did what she thought was right, which is what we all have to do as continuing to remember the Holocaust and to carry on for the future, so that things don't happen again. And that's really what came out a lot in that. I thought it was a very, very, very powerful film. Thank you.
I think that how small the pig gets at the end, this tiny pig, so it reminds me of holding my baby, I got quite emotional, hugging this slightly bigger pig and then this tiny piglet in her hand. And that tiny gesture, and animation is very good at expressing gesture and touch. The smallest thing you do as a human being, the smallest human gesture or creaturey gesture can make a big difference. And I think that's really powerful. And it speaks to kind of what Peter said earlier on as well. We can all make a difference in the tiniest things we do. We don't have to go out of our way to make a difference in the world. We can do this and hold and help.
It also introduced compassion, which I think is something. It's a very interesting word and something we all strive towards. But I again, coming back to this sense of in our busy lives and other things draw us away, we feel compassion sometimes in a moment, and she set the pig free, and you really felt it with this, as you say, almost like holding a tiny baby. But it's really hard then to hold on to that. You know, none of us want to be bystanders. And yet, other things distract us and our lives move on.
There's something there about the collective as well, isn't it? There's sort of the power where they're all kind of marching off and then they're together, and there's how easy it is to kind of be pulled up into the collective energy that you're doing a thing. And then that moment, as you said, about kind of standing up as individual, going, I'm going to break away from this. I'm going to be the person that initiates the change, and that we can all do that.
I don't know if any of the wonderful pupils have joined us who want to share. It doesn't have to be a question, it doesn't have to be profound and philosophical. Want to share your initial thoughts about the film at all? Are you feeling brave? I can't see anyone, sorry.
With the film being in an animatic, it feels a lot more impactful because people tend to see animations as childish or for the younger generation that they don't expect such harsh and serious topics to be covered in. So I think having something that's not such as an expected topic to be covered in an animation just is a bit more impactful to show how it actually can impact those it had effect on.
By the fact this was an animation. Oh, it might's gone now. Sorry.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Were you quite shocked that this was dealt with in an animated form?
Yeah, I wasn't expecting an animation at all, but it definitely took more of an impact than a realistic film would have for me.
Thank you. And just to continue that dialogue, is that because so far in your experience, animation has been something rather more frivolous or jokey, or not something that's dealt with serious topics?
I find that when it comes to animatics, people tend to find harsh and serious topics harder to express properly, and so seeing it done so magnificently definitely gave a greater impact, yes.
That's interesting. It was also quite interesting then, maybe following on from what you're saying, that the boy who laughed in the class, to me, he was expressing his anxiety, or maybe trying to suppress emotions which he wasn't ready to own at that age. And so he went to making fun of Chaim rather than staying with his own feelings of pain.
I would say to all of you who have never seen an animation about a serious topic, there's a whole genre called animated documentary. So documentaries that only use animation or mostly use animation. So if you're interested and curious about this as a format, please do go explore the internet world of animated documentaries. There are many have been at film festivals. Any other comments? Yeah, there's one here behind the camera.
I just wanted to say I thought it was very powerful moving from the monochromatic sort of black and white stages to then the light yellowy colours. But I was wondering, do you think that topics like these with Holocaust and, you know, really powerful, serious topics should be then continued with more animation, or if they should then sort of stay with, you know, Schindler's List and things that are quite, you know, a bit more, you know, live action?
Personally, I think it's good if we have both, if we have a variety. I mean, there are always going to be more narrative or documentary films than animation, either short films or full length. But I think it's good to have both. I think they address different parts of our brain. Maybe we're more comfortable with narrative films that are acted. But I often find myself rather wishing that character wasn't portraying that person, or maybe I have more concerns with the characters that are portrayed by the actors. Somehow this is more, it definitely speaks to a different part of my brain. More, I think it stays with me more in some ways. But I think it's good to have both. I would always want there to be all strands.
No, I agree, and I think, particularly in today's world where people are constantly questioning the construction of images, AI-generated images, etc., that documentary films that include images of actual archives, like Peter shared actual archives and historical photographs today, and that's really important to share the documents of the past. But then animations touch us in an affective, in the feeling, in the subconscious way, and deal with those things that you can't show in document form, which is the dreams, the feelings, the experience, which is wish-washy and you can't write it down or take a photograph of it. I have the same feeling sometimes with live-action films. Meryl Streep, Daniel Craig, and Kate Winslet have been to get all the three of them in quite a few Holocaust films, and I can see you. I can't see the character. We do sometimes have that challenge. I think I've watched hundreds and hundreds of Holocaust films. My PhD was in Holocaust film, and I got a bit fatigued of the same kind of narrative, and then be like, oh, someone's done something different, but it still felt the performative thing. And I agree with Judy that you need all of them. Animation is the thing that I think touches me more as a human being. There's a question of here. Sorry.
Thanks very much indeed. Question to both of you really about all kinds of film. Films are hugely impactful on you. It's sometimes you might read about a subject, then see a film, but it's the film that sticks in your mind. And I'm just wondering, is there any danger in the sense that obviously a film does have fictionalized elements, it has very subjective elements, and sometimes these can be questioned. But is there a danger that the story of the Holocaust and other things will be remembered because of the way Schindler's List was made, or Judgment at Nuremberg and so on?
I think it's a good question, and it's relevant. Certainly, I think that we keep asking this, how much and how accurate is the research, and is there some poetic license that is going to distort? On the other hand, I think, personally, I would rather that was happening than silence. I know that's one extreme to the other, but I think often things are called out in film, which is also important. It means we're discussing it. You're thinking about how accurate was that filmmaker, how is their integrity, in place, and they haven't distorted the story to make it more appealing or less shocking. Personally, I would still want films to be made, even with some distortion, I think.
Some colleagues of ours at the University at Bern did a survey in Switzerland, because that's where they're based, at the end of last year, and they're doing another one again this year, about where people most encounter the Holocaust. And it's film and documentary. It's like the whole graph along. I'm not a social scientist, the big bar. And then even social media is quite low down, which is quite surprising in comparison. So those traditional forms of film and documentary is still a really big influence on people's brains. For me, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the film Life is Beautiful. I wouldn't be doing the work I do. I saw that when I was relatively young, and it stuck with me. If my mum picked it out of Blockbusters on VHS, that's how old I am. And I was like, oh, it looks boring, and just like, it looks like a family thing my mum likes. And it stuck with me so much, that this idea that someone had tried to make a comedy about this period, and whether you could make a comedy. And actually, it's really a film about protecting a child in a context of trauma. But that film, it won lots of Oscars, but was hugely contested publicly. And that encouraged lots of discussions. And I'm a bit of a cinema purist, that I think cinema is a social experience and should have these kinds of post-film discussions. So when you end up with kind of the newspaper debates, academic debates, or public discussions like this after a film, great. Obviously that doesn't happen as much now. People watch things on Netflix. But I think even there, if a film can make you question, is this the right genre? Should this be how you do the past? I think it's really powerful, and that's how I ended up coming in to study the Holocaust and cinema and the relationship between the two. So for me, a controversial Holocaust film had a profound effect on my entire life. So I'm a bit biased with that.
If you take a film like The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas, I think, again, for a lot of young people, that might have been their first introduction to the Holocaust. I would hope then they would go on to see more realistic films, documentaries, other films, to widen their experience.
I think often when we see a film about a past we didn't know about or we don't understand, we go, oh, I didn't realise that happened. And that we, particularly now, we look on our phone, even during the film, or with Netflix and Amazon, you can do it on the screen, can't you, while the film's playing. We are curious and we try and find out more about that thing. And I think as long as we maintain our human curiosity, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I don't think fiction film can ever tell us the whole story of the Holocaust or ever can't suppress, because it just, as a format, just isn't designed to do that. And the industry, at least in the mainstream, is not going to fund a film that is an incredibly solemn, very, very realistic, very long narrative of the Holocaust. And so that's that tension between industry, audience desires, format and aesthetics, and then this complex and difficult past.
I may well have missed an explanation, but was this particular synergy of animation and acting a new departure in any way, because it was so powerful?
I haven't seen it. I think this, actually, I've jumped in, but it's more a question for you. I haven't seen it in quite this way. It was very delicate. And certainly, if you look on the making of Letter to a Pig on YouTube, the animator, the French animator, was very excited by the whole process. So I found it very original, and I've seen a lot of animation. I think it was beautifully executed. But you've seen many more animation films. So.
I've seen animations that use real objects and then kind of repurpose them and kind of blend them. There's one called Malenka from the Czech Republic, which is a completely amateur film made by a teenager who just moves objects around and tries to kind of think about occupied Czechoslovakia and then Auschwitz, and he moves between drawing and moving objects, and that's quite common. And stop motion often just used objects. A lot of the classic, the Key brothers, Jan Sprankmeyer, used objects in their films. Rotoscoping is a very popular technique, so the drawing over people, but bringing the people back into the animation. I've not seen it before.
No.
And I get that same feeling from the making of, that they were like, oh, this is something new. What can we do with this?
And by the way, I should add that this was an Oscar-nominated short film, so real accolade. It also won the Ophir Award at the Jerusalem Film Festival. So it has been much appreciated and awarded as well. Yeah.
I don't want to sound a bit harsh, but is it a danger of using pigs? If I'm a 13-year-old and I see this film, will I potentially have the best, most ideal, thought patterns?
Do you mean is it
dehumanizing?
Dehumanizing people. Well, what did you think in the beginning of the film, where the pig very obviously used its intelligence to shield the boy? How did you feel about the pig at the beginning?
I don't know.
I think also if we go to Chaim and his story, he very much was writing a letter to thank the pig for his life. So we've got that side of the story, and I agree then we have the monster pig. But we return at the end to the pig as a cherished being. So I think we take from it what we will. I hope it doesn't leave you with...
How did you feel about the film?
I mean, I was honestly, when I saw the pig, it was quite scary. And I thought that, maybe it's a symbol of Germany, because, pork is very, very much consumed in Germany. And, there's obviously wild boars in Germany and Schwarzwald and Sächsische Schweiz, and, etc. So, is that something to do there?
I think you're right. The pig in the woods, in the forest, became a wild boar, didn't it? It suddenly took a slightly different image, certainly from the ones in the pigsty. It'd be interesting to see the different levels of of what was put onto the pig as a saviour and then as the enemy. So it varied a lot. Maybe they'll settle in your mind over time.
I think the question you raised about age, though, is really important and touches on what someone up there said about animation and the kind of it being perceived as a medium for children, is that we assume animations are for 13-year-olds, 9-year-olds, 7-year-olds, 3-year-olds. I'm not sure a 3-year-old would appreciate a 7-year-old. And that actually, this film is aimed at adults, I think, and an adult audience. And that more and more animation is, and that challenging. I remember when I was writing about Holocaust animation, and I showed one of my friends a talk I was giving, and they were like, you haven't addressed that animation's just for fun. And I was like, it's not though. And I was like, actually, my audience is going to think that, and I should start with that, thank you. But that was totally out of my mind as someone who'd studied very serious animations for 2 or 3 years. And it's a medium of expression, it's an art form. But you're right, that there's this perception that animation is for young people, and therefore kind of sophisticated messages might get lost and muddled. And I think the important thing with any kind of film is that they're made for audiences, and that every audience member is different, and that everyone takes something different from the film. And that while we talked about directors' intentions at the beginning, that's not necessarily what the message you have to take from something. And every time I've watched this film, I've seen a slightly different film, I found.
And I think perceptions to animation, as I said earlier, are really changing. I can see Gideon approaching. Are we coming to the end of our time to talk?
So, first of all, I would like to say it's really amazing how much kind of meaning one can pack into, 15, 17 minutes of a film. So I would really like to thank both of you, Vicky and Judy, for this really stimulating discussion, and for all of you for participating. I think one of the reasons that we chose this film is, has been said here during the discussion, that it's actually started as a dream, as a reaction to our Holocaust survivor testimonies. So I'm looking now at the back, who knows what kind of effect our event today had on other people. Maybe in 10 years' time, we'll sit here and watch a film that one of the participants here from the audience will have. So thank you very much for coming and sharing these insights with us. Thank you for coming, and we all look forward to welcome you to our campus next year in our Holocaust Memorial Day. Thank you so much.